In the quiet outskirts of Montana, just beyond the reach of the nearest town, winter had already settled deeply. Snow blanketed the wide-open fields and nestled heavy on the towering pine trees. It was the kind of cold that crept through every layer of clothing and settled into the bones, chilling to the marrow. This was where Sarah Thompson and her 2 young sons, Jacob and Eli, found themselves on a bitterly cold evening, standing beside the road with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small backpack. Sarah's breath came out in visible puffs, mixing with the cold air as she tried to shield her boys from the biting wind. The 2 boys, ages 9 and 6, clung tightly to her, their small faces pale and eyes wide with fear and confusion. They had no idea where to go next. Earlier that day, Sarah's world had fallen apart. After the sudden death of her husband, 6 months ago, she had struggled to keep their small family afloat. The job she held at the local diner barely covered rent, and when the landlord raised the price unexpectedly, she found herself unable to pay. Eviction came swiftly, with a legal notice pinned to their front door. Homelessness loomed, and with no family close by and no money saved, Sarah felt trapped and helpless. She had taken the boys to a local shelter, but with winter's deep chill and limited space, the shelter had no room for them. The city's cold weather services were overwhelmed, and the buses stopped running late. Desperation drove Sarah to leave the town limits in search of somewhere, anywhere, to keep her boys safe. She had heard about a ranch on the outskirts where an older man lived quietly. No one really knew much about him. Some said he was a recluse. Others whispered about his kindness to lost travelers. It was a long shot, but it was the only one Sarah had. As twilight faded, the road ahead was barely visible beneath the thick snow. The sky grew darker, and the temperature dropped further. Sarah hugged her sons tightly, whispering soothing words as she scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter. After what felt like hours of trudging through the deep snow, she finally spotted a dim light glowing softly in the distance. Hope surged through her. It was a small cabin, modest but sturdy, surrounded by snow-covered fences and tall pines. The quiet rancher's home. With renewed energy, Sarah and the boys hurried toward the light, each step crunching loudly in the still night. At the door stood a man, weathered but calm. His eyes were gentle, and his voice carried a quiet strength when he greeted them. Without hesitation, he opened the door wider and beckoned them inside. For the first time that night, Sarah felt warmth not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from the kindness of a stranger who offered shelter without question. As they entered the cozy cabin, Sarah glanced back at the storm outside, feeling an unfamiliar sense of relief. They were no longer alone in the snow. The cabin smelled of pine wood and faint smoke from the fire burning steadily in the hearth. The warmth was immediate and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold that had bitten into Sarah and her boys just moments before. The rancher, whose name was Thomas, moved quietly but with purpose. Placing a blanket around Jacob's shoulders and handing Eli a steaming mug of warm milk, Sarah watched silently, gratitude welling up inside her. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of the cold lift just a little. Thomas was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. His rugged hands showed years of hard work on the land, yet his gentle manner made it clear. He had a kindness that wasn't easily given but was deeply felt by those fortunate enough to receive it. "Sit by the fire," he said, gesturing toward a small but sturdy wooden table and chairs. "I'll get you some food. You all must be starving." Sarah nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much this means to us." As Thomas moved to prepare a simple meal, Sarah looked around the cabin. It was small but well kept, with a few personal touches that made it feel like home. A worn quilt on the couch, a shelf of old books, and pictures of a family long past on the walls. The boys, still shy but clearly drawn to the warmth and safety of the cabin, sat close together near the fire. Jacob, the older of the 2, peeked up at Sarah, his eyes still wide but less fearful than before. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think we'll be okay here?" Sarah smiled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I think we'll be just fine." As the meal was served, hearty stew with fresh bread, the 3 of them began to relax, their tense bodies slowly unwinding in the presence of this quiet stranger who had opened his home without hesitation. Thomas sat with them, listening, more than speaking, but when he did speak, his words were measured and thoughtful. "You're safe here," he said finally, "for as long as you need." Those words echoed in Sarah's mind, filling her with hope she hadn't felt in a long time. The night stretched on with gentle conversation and shared stories. Sarah told Thomas about her husband's passing, the struggles she faced, and her determination to keep her son safe no matter what. Thomas shared little about himself, only that he'd lived on this land for many years, finding peace in the quiet of the open fields and the rhythm of the seasons. The boys, sensing the safety in the room, slowly began to laugh and play quietly by the fire. Eli showed Thomas his favorite toy truck, and Thomas listened with a smile. As sleep finally crept in, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The cold outside hadn't disappeared, but inside this small cabin, surrounded by warmth and kindness, a new chapter had begun. The morning sun filtered softly through the frost-covered windows, casting a gentle glow over the cabin's wooden floor. Sarah woke to the quiet sounds of the boys stirring beside her and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Thomas was already up, tending to the small wood stove that heated the cabin and kept the chill at bay. It had been the first real night of rest Sarah had experienced in weeks. The warmth of the fire, the safety of the cabin, and the unspoken promise of kindness had wrapped around her like a protective blanket. For the first time since her world had unraveled, she felt the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild. As the boys sat at the table, sharing a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, Thomas quietly observed them from the doorway. He was a man accustomed to solitude and routine, but something about the family's presence stirred a new feeling inside him, something like purpose. "Thank you for everything," Sarah said softly as she caught Thomas's eye. "We don't have anywhere else to go." Thomas nodded. "You're welcome here. You're safe for as long as you need." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost like normal life. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, Sarah helped with small chores around the ranch, feeding the animals, stacking firewood, and tending the garden shed. The boys explored the snow-covered fields under Thomas's watchful eye, learning about the rhythms of ranch life and the quiet beauty of the land. Jacob, who had always been the more reserved of the two, found a surprising connection with Thomas. They would spend hours fixing fences or gathering firewood. And slowly, the boy began to open up, asking questions about the ranch and Thomas's life. Eli, with his boundless curiosity, was captivated by the horses and chickens, laughing with delight as he fed them grain. For Sarah, these moments were a balm to her weary heart. She found herself laughing more, sharing stories with Thomas, and even dreaming again. The rancher's quiet strength and steady kindness gave her a sense of stability she hadn't known she needed. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, Sarah and Thomas stood side by side near the barn. The boys played nearby, their laughter ringing through the crisp air. "I never expected to find this," Sarah said quietly, her breath visible in the cold air. "Sometimes life surprises us," Thomas replied, a rare softness in his voice, "especially when we need it most." As the winter deepened, the bond between the widow, her sons, and the quiet rancher grew stronger. Together, they faced the challenges of the season's snowstorms, icy mornings, and the isolation of the remote land. But through it all, they found warmth not only in the fire but in the newfound family they were building. Sarah knew their journey was far from over, but for now, they had shelter, safety, and hope. And sometimes, that was enough. Winter in Montana had a way of testing even the toughest souls. As days passed, the snow grew heavier, blanketing the ranch in thick white and making travel nearly impossible. The biting wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows of the small cabin like a warning from nature itself. But inside, the fire burned steadily, casting warm shadows on the faces of Sarah, Jacob, Eli, and Thomas. It was during these long, cold days that their bond truly began to solidify, just out of necessity, but out of genuine care and trust. Sarah found herself leaning on Thomas more than she had ever imagined. He was patient and steady, a quiet presence who didn't push but offered help whenever it was needed. One evening, as the snowstorm raged outside, Thomas sat by the fire sharpening tools. Sarah was stitching a tear in one of Jacob's sweaters, while the boys listened to the crackling flames. "I never thought I'd be here," Sarah said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "After everything that's happened, I thought we were lost." Thomas looked up, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "Sometimes, the hardest roads lead us exactly where we need to be." The boys, sensing the emotion in their mother's voice, moved closer. Jacob wrapped an arm around Eli, who looked up at Thomas with wide eyes. "You're not lost anymore," Thomas said gently. "You're part of this place now. Part of this family." Outside, the storm howled louder, but, inside, the warmth of their growing connection kept the cold at bay. Days later, the snow finally began to ease. The ranch was buried beneath several feet of white, but Thomas and Sarah worked side by side to clear paths, check on the animals, and prepare for the coming weeks. Jacob surprised them both by taking a keen interest in learning the ranch skills. He helped mend fences, carry firewood, and even learned how to feed the horses. Eli, still full of youthful energy, found joy in the smallest things, watching birds peck at the feeders, making snow angels, and chasing the occasional rabbit across the fields. Sarah watched her sons grow stronger, their fears replaced by curiosity and hope. She herself felt a quiet strength, returning, a resilience born from the kindness and stability that Thomas offered without expectation. One afternoon, as the sun finally broke through the clouds, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch steps, watching the boys play in the melting snow. Thomas joined her quietly, offering a flask of warm tea. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." He smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "You're welcome. It's what neighbors do." For Sarah, those words meant more than she could say. They had come to this remote place, cast out and desperate, but together, they had built something new. A sanctuary in the snow. A family forged not by blood, but by compassion. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, surrounded by warmth, love, and the quiet strength of the land, Sarah and her sons had found a place to call home. Spring in Montana arrived slowly, melting away the heavy blanket of snow to reveal fresh green shoots pushing through the earth. The days grew longer, and the chill in the air softened, inviting new life and new hope. For Sarah, Jacob, Eli, and Thomas, this change of season brought a chance to look beyond survival toward building a future. Life at the ranch had settled into a comforting rhythm, but Sarah knew their journey was far from over. The emotional scars left by loss and hardship still lingered, especially for the boys. Sometimes at night, she would hear Jacob's quiet sobs or Eli's soft questions about their father. Reminders that healing took time. One afternoon, as the family worked together repairing a fence near the pasture, Thomas paused and looked thoughtfully toward the horizon. "You know," he said slowly, "I haven't always been this quiet rancher. There was a time when I had a family of my own." Sarah looked up, surprised. She had never asked much about Thomas's past, sensing it was a chapter he kept closed. "It didn't end well," he continued, voice low but steady. "I lost my wife and daughter in an accident years ago. After that, I came out here to find peace and a fresh start." The news struck Sarah deeply. She had known pain before, but hearing Thomas's story made her realize how much strength it took for him to open his home and heart to her family. "We all carry wounds," Sarah said softly. "But together, maybe we can help each other heal." Thomas nodded. "That's why I'm glad you're here." The boys listened quietly, absorbing the moment. Jacob, usually reserved, looked at Thomas with newfound respect and understanding. In the weeks that followed, the ranch felt alive with possibility. Sarah began helping Thomas with bookkeeping for the ranch, using skills from her previous job. Jacob and Eli took to chores eagerly, their laughter ringing through the fields as they learned how to care for the animals and tend the land. One morning, Sarah received a letter from a social worker she had contacted before arriving at the ranch. It offered assistance with housing and education for the boys, a reminder that while this sanctuary was a blessing, the wider world still awaited. She shared the news with Thomas that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the mountains. "This place has been a lifeline," she said. "But I want to make sure the boys have a future beyond the ranch." Thomas smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Whatever you decide, you'll always have a home here." The quiet rancher who had offered shelter in a snowstorm had become family, and as the land around them blossomed with spring's promise, so too did their hope for a brighter tomorrow. The warm days of late spring brought renewed energy to the ranch and its inhabitants. Sarah, Jacob, Eli, and Thomas worked tirelessly, each contributing in their own way to the small but thriving community they had created. The fields were tilled, fences repaired, and the animals healthy and content. Sarah found herself dreaming again, not just of survival, but of building a life where her boys could grow up with stability and love. She enrolled the boys in the nearby town school, and the two boys, shy at first, began making friends and learning new things every day. Thomas often drove them to and from school, his quiet presence a reassuring constant. One afternoon, as Sarah and Thomas sat by the creek that bordered the ranch, she spoke openly about her hopes and fears. "I want the boys to have opportunities I never had," she said, "a future where they can chase their dreams." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "They're strong kids. And with you guiding them, they'll do well." The rancher's steady support and the family's growing confidence brought a sense of peace Sarah hadn't known since her husband passed. The seasons were turning, and with them came new possibilities. But life on the ranch was not without its challenges. A sudden storm threatened the crops, and a sick calf tested their resilience. Yet, through it all, they faced each obstacle together, united by shared strength and love. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Sarah looked around the cabin, her boys asleep peacefully, Thomas reading by the fire, and felt a deep gratitude. "We're more than survivors," she thought. "We're a family." Summer dawned bright and clear over the Montana ranch, the golden light spilling over rolling hills and sparkling streams. For Sarah, Jacob, Eli, and Thomas, it marked not just the changing season but the beginning of a new chapter, a life rebuilt from hardship and strengthened by compassion. The cabin, once a refuge in a snowstorm, had become a home filled with laughter, warmth, and dreams. Sarah watched her sons grow with pride, their faces brighter, their spirits stronger. Jacob excelled at school and took on more responsibilities at the ranch. Eli's boundless energy brought joy to everyone around him, and Thomas's quiet guidance helped shape them both into confident boys. One evening, as they sat around the fire under a blanket of stars, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The road here had been hard, filled with loss and uncertainty, but the journey had led them to something precious, a family not defined by blood, but by kindness, trust, and love. Thomas looked at Sarah and smiled softly. "You and your boys are always welcome here." Sarah smiled back, her heart full. "Thank you for giving us a second chance." The fire crackled, the night humming softly with the sounds of nature and hope. They knew challenges would come again, but together, they were ready to face whatever the future held. In the quiet of the Montana night, a widow and her sons, once cast out into the snow, had found refuge, strength, and a new dawn.